uh, reference what I'm calling the Act 92 statement that I have read into the record at prior meetings, which explains the authority to hold a meeting like this the way we are pursuant to the temporary exemptions or modifications to the Vermont open meeting laws triggered by the governor's emergency declaration as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And we'll have the minutes reflect that we are doing that using the Zoom internet platform, which makes video and telephonic attendance possible. You've received and the minutes of the October 22nd meeting of the board, and those are have been posted. They just are pretty much standard meetings going through what we did at the meeting, updates on the topics from the prior meeting. What can the board start working on now? How we're going to set how many meetings we're going to have, at least initially. Other business. Is there anyone who would like to move acceptance of the October 22 meeting minutes?
Sure.
So Mr. Koch moves that we adopt them and approve the minutes. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Rob Roper seconds. Any discussion? Additions or corrections? Seeing no one rising, I will call the question. Are all in favor of the motion to approve the minutes of the October 22 meeting, please say aye.
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 Opposed, please say no. I think we have approved those minutes. That brings us to the public comment portion of the meeting under Title I, Section 312H. Is there anyone from the public who would like to be recognized and address the board? I would add that we do have an active website as it is on the Vermont Secretary of State website, sos.vermont.gov, and on the banner at the top of that landing page, there is an apportionment place to click that will take you directly to there, and we are going to be setting up a place for public input and comment there as well. Seeing nobody, and I should also add that courtesy of the Secretary of State's office, we're having this meeting recorded for posterity and for anyone who wasn't able to attend or would like in the future to see what we were talking about today. So we'll move on to updates, and I'm pleased to tell you all that we're fortunate to have James Whitehorn, who is the chief of the Census, Redistricting and Voting Rights Data Office at the United States Census. He came to my attention through our Legislative Council colleagues, Betsy Ann Rask and Michael Chernick, who have been following census developments and updates through the National Conference of State Legislatures, NCSL, and in talking with them recently, I was thinking out loud, it would be nice to have an update, the current update from the US Census about what their schedule is looking like and what they will be providing to us when their final numbers come in. And James came highly recommended. He has sent around to the board members, and it now has been posted on our website, a set of PowerPoint slides. I'd welcome James and thank you for making time for us today, and I'll turn the floor over to you.
Oh, thank you very much. So I am going to take that PowerPoint presentation and actually go through the slides for you all, just as a way to sort of structure the conversation and the information. This is a manageable sized group. I think if anyone has any questions or needs elaboration or clarification on anything I say, I welcome you to interrupt me and we can address it right at the moment, so people don't have to save their questions to the end. But I did want to use the PowerPoint format just because I have some reference materials that are in the presentation that I thought might be handy for you to have even after the presentation is over. So give me 1 second here and let's see, it says I can't share my screen. The host disabled participant screen sharing. Is that something that you can enable so I can do that or not? Or should I just go through and tell you what page I'm talking about?
Whoever's running the Zoom has access to that. Chris, we can't hear you because your mic's off.
Thanks, Ed. I will do that. One moment, James. Let me just. I see more options where I can make you the host, but I don't see a sharing option there.
If you make him the host, he should be able to share.
And I can do that. Let's see. I'll do that, James. I'm going to make you the host.
Okay.
You should be all set.
All right. All right. So can I just get a verbal confirmation that you can see that?
Yes.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you, Tom, for the invitation. I'm very happy to speak with you all here today. I'm going to focus on two specific areas. One is the 2020 census itself. And then after that, I'm going to go into some specifics about the redistricting data program so you can know what to expect in the coming months. So starting with the 2020 census, the Census Bureau completed our collection of responses to the census on October 15th. The collection instruments were brought down around midnight in Hawaii's time that day, but we continue to accept paper forms that were postmarked on October 15th as long as we received them by the 22nd. And now that the collection's completed, we're starting to get a good picture of how our collection went. Nationwide, we had 99.98% of all housing units and addresses accounted for in the 2020 census. We resolved 152 million addresses and resolved, when we say resolved, that means we either got a self-response, we collected a non-response follow-up response, the unit was given an indication of being vacant or being deleted, but we had some sort of resolution to the status of that address. Every state and DC and Puerto Rico reached at least 99% total response rate. That's the combined response rate between self-response and a non-response follow-up. And all but one state was at 99.9% for a total response rate. So that would be where Vermont sits. When you break that down into those two components, we have a self-response rate of 67% for the nation, which is on par with what we had in 2010. We had 99 million self-responses, of which the majority, 79 million, were internet. 18 million used the traditional paper, and then 1.83 million used the phone. This census, we allowed our phone centers to actually take interviews as opposed to just providing support to people on how to fill out their paper responses. 28 states met or exceeded their self-response rate from 2010. Vermont was pretty much on par with what you did in 2010. You had a 60.5% response rate in 2020 and a 60.3 response rate, self-response rate in 2010. Excuse me. We were very pleased to be able to report that the questionnaire assistance centers, those are those telephone operators that I mentioned that provided people with support for understanding how to fill out their census, or were actually able to conduct the interview, operated without interruption despite the pandemic from March 12th all the way through October 15th. So people were able to access that. That's where they could get language support services. That's where they could conduct their response over the phone. that went uninterrupted. And then our internet self-response operation, a lot of people were very worried. We were on a GAO watch list for technology projects. People still have a vivid memory of the healthcare.gov rollout from many years ago. But we actually fielded that internet self-response instrument with zero downtime through the entire collection window of March to October. Our non-response follow-up, which is where we go and collect those responses for the areas that did not self-respond, accounted for 32.9% of total responses. I'm sorry, did someone have a question? All right. And that was done with an extreme number of challenges. There's always challenges with every census. I would say that this census was a bit unusual with the sheer volume and scope of those challenges. We had repeated hurricanes in the Gulf Coast states. We had, of course, the global pandemic, which was not predicted, required the Census Bureau to quickly get 42 million pieces of PPE and get it distributed to our frontline workers. There were wildfires out west, where actually during some days they stated the air quality in those areas was the worst in the world. We had civil unrest. But despite all of that, we were able to get the work done by increasing our enumerator productivity to almost 2 cases per hour over the 1 case per hour we had in the paper environment in 2010. One of our main focuses, we had 4 areas of focus for improvement for the 2020 census, and one of them was on automating and creating efficiencies in our field workforce. We did this through automating operations such as the back end types of things of payroll and case assignments. We had on the devices that the enumerators used, they had optimization routing so that people knew the best route and time of day in which to try to collect that non-response follow-up. We got 9 million people. Yes.
Hi, it's Tom Little. I just could, how long have you been with the census, and were you there for the last go around? Just curious to know how long you've been having this much fun.
I was there for the last census. My career path was I worked in, and this is how I ended up in redistricting, is I worked as a contractor, a GIS analyst for the Department of Justice and the Civil Rights Division in their voting section for about 5 or 6 years. And then I came over to Census in 2006. So I'm just about at my 15-year anniversary.
Okay, thank you.
This is Tom Koch. Do I understand that the critical date was where you were on the night of April 1st?
Yes, so the census is the decennial census is considered a snapshot, and we are requesting, or we were when we requested people to respond, they were supposed to use April 1st as the reference date.
So where we had a lot of colleges and the University of Vermont send people home toward about the 3rd week in March, we should see a substantial change from 2010 in the number of people showing up in dormitories and, well, primarily dormitories. Is that correct?
Well, so we won't know for sure until we finish processing the data. A lot of the university students that we collect when they're on campus and living in on-campus housing, we collect that in cooperation with the university. And we did extensive outreach knowing that with a lot of the universities sending people home prior to or around that reference date, that would be an issue. So we worked extra hard with the universities to try to make sure that we got the listings from them through either their administrative records or through other sources. The off-campus housing, of course, will be more challenging. We encouraged people to fill out their census, even if they were currently residing in a different location, but they would have typically been living and being at that April 1st or date, they would have been at the college. We asked them to fill that out. We have systems in place so that we can try to identify them and deduplicate them should their parents have double counted them or double reported them in both locations. It's not to say that there won't necessarily be some sort of effect there, but we won't know for certain until we see the final results after they've been tabulated.
So if
there was extensive attention paid to that because it was an early identified issue that was created by the pandemic.
So if they had rented an apartment in Middlebury, say, and Middlebury shut down, and because there were no classes, these young people went back to live with their parents for a while, they would be counted where?
Well, where they live and sleep most of the time would be at the university. It's what our resident situations and criteria indicate. And so if they went online and filled out the census form, they should have indicated their April 1st location of being at the university.
Hmm.
So,
Okay, thank you.
all right, you're welcome. And so then I was just going to conclude on this slide by just saying that we also got a large amount of cooperation with millions of additional addresses self-responding after an enumerator hit their house and hung a reminder on the door saying that, you've been visited, please go ahead and self-respond. So with our automated systems, we were able to identify those houses that had self-responded from that notice of visit and remove them from the rolls so that we didn't waste enumerator resources of sending the non-response follow-up teams to addresses that had already responded. So that was another way we were able to get some efficiency in the whole process. So in the non-response follow-up, we had 5.6% of addresses nationwide were resolved using administrative records. We use administrative records when census taker efforts to contact the housing units are unsuccessful. And our analysis shows us with a high confidence level that those administrative records are complete and correct. So we completed 13.9% of the non-response workload using those records, but that's lower than what we expected. We were actually expecting 22.5% of cases with high quality records that would have been used if the first visit was not successful or a self-response was never received. The use of administrative records to enumerate non-responding households and resolve addresses was another one of those key innovation areas, which I mentioned about the automation for the field operations. The increased use of administrative records was also a key innovation area in the 2020 census and was part of the original 2020 census design. The administrative records that we used for that work were from the Internal Revenue Service, Medicare and Medicaid, Social Security, and then also the previous decennial data. 24.1% of occupied housing units were in their non-response follow-up universe were enumerated by proxy. Each decade, we have to use proxy responses to account for some addresses that do not respond to the census. If a census taker can't get a response directly from a household after 3 visits, except where, of course, those administrative records are available, they try to get information about the address from a proxy, such as a neighbor, a landlord, or a building manager. Because COVID-19 delayed the start of our census taker visits, we figured we might need to significantly increase the proxy rate this decade. But we're pleased to report that the proxy rate is actually similar to the 2010 proxy rate. We don't have a final proxy rate for the 2020 census until we finish processing the data, but we will publish that as well. We do expect that it may decrease as we remove duplicates during our data processing. So in addition to these early indicators, there's 2 primary methods for evaluating the overall quality of the census. Demographic analysis is a technique used to develop an understanding of the age, sex, and racial composition of a population and how it's changed over time through the basic demographic processes of births, deaths, and migration. These results, when compared to the 2020 census results, will provide an indicator of the census's quality. The demographic analysis numbers are independent of the 2020 census, and we published them 2 days ago on December 15th. So they're already out there. So you may have seen a news article saying that census estimates that the national population is around 330 million. That came from that demographic analysis process, which is completely independent of the 2020 census. So when we get the 2020 census numbers, you can compare them to those estimates to see how well we've done. A second indicator is from the Post-Enumeration Survey. This is a short survey that's run after each census to determine how many people were missed or counted more than once. It's run independently from the census to provide an independent assessment of the completeness of the census. From that survey, it's possible to determine the number of people who were counted and the number of people who should have been counted. This is how we're able to determine the difference, which is referred to as the net undercount. And these undercount results are highly anticipated measures of the census's quality, but they, of course, will not be out until the end of 2021 and early 2022. That post-enumeration survey is actually still ongoing. It happens after the collections for the census have completed. In addition to those, we also have, we assess the quality of census by evaluating how well the operations were conducted. And by looking at how they were conducted, we can get a sense of the quality of the overall results. So in the coming months, we're going to conduct extensive evaluations of our operations and make that data available to the public, as we've done each decade. And some of these evaluations are analyzing how the mobile devices work for the census takers and the refusal rates that we had, getting that final proxy rate that I mentioned out. Additional information about responses by response mode. So how it differed between telephone versus paper versus internet, how it differed by demographic groups or by language spoken once we have that information processed. There's an additional set of operational metrics that are going to be related to data quality that we'll release when we release apportionment data. We've invited in an independent group of scientists called the JASON. They're going to do something they call it a short, quick study, a winter study, to review our plans, our processes, and our procedures and proposed metrics around data quality. And then we're also going to be working with the American Statistical Association and the National Academies of Sciences and Engineering and Medicine on assessing data quality. So we've got a lot of different looks and avenues in which to analyze the quality of how this 2020 census operations were conducted and the data that we're producing.
James, quickly, when do those outside groups report back, and are those reports public?
So all of the ones that I mentioned here will be made public. The JASON group, their winter study, they typically do very sort of long range studies. They'll meet and they'll interview people, and then they do their own research, and then they create a report, and it takes quite a long time. But they also have something they call winter study, which is a more compressed schedule. So I would expect something from the JASON group to be out in the spring. The work with the American Statistical Association and the National Academies will probably be a much deeper dive into the data and take a longer time frame. But we would expect that also to be public once it's completed. We do definitely believe that transparency is our friend when we are trying to make the public and data users understand the quality of the data that we're providing to them. So all of these will be made public.
As I think I mentioned to you when you and I spoke by phone, we have a set of deadlines that are essentially next July and August under current Vermont statutes. So when you say, I mean, it would, and to the extent to which there is one or more outside reviews and comments on the data integrity and quality and all that sort of thing, the sooner the better from our perspective. And I know that's clear to you. I just thought it would be worth mentioning during the meeting.
Yeah, I think the the ones around apportionment, obviously, because apportionment will be one of the first data products out the door. So the data quality indicators that they'll put out around that will come earlier. I think they'll also be able to do some of these different evaluations of response mode and demographic groups and languages, and the refusal rates and those kind of things can come out a little earlier. These evaluations from groups like the JSON and the Statistical Association may take a little longer just because of the nature and the depth at which they'll look.
Good.
So now I'm actually going to switch gears to my area of specialty, which is the redistricting data program, and also about the products that come from it. For those of you who may not be aware, the redistricting data program at the Census Bureau exists because of Public Law 94-171, and it can be summarized basically by the mission statement, which is to provide states an opportunity to identify the geographic areas for which specific tabulations of population are needed for legislative redistricting, and to deliver high quality data for those areas in a timely manner. Over the decades since the program's inception, those areas have been identified as census tabulation blocks and voting districts. Census blocks are the smallest piece of geography that the census publishes data for. Voting districts are precincts and wards. And then, of course, the higher level electoral geography of state legislative districts and congressional districts when they apply. We have, as you mentioned, Michael Chernick and Betsy Rask as the official liaisons to the redistricting data program, but we've also worked with John Adams and David Fox at the Vermont Center for Geographic Information to do some of this exchange of data. The requirements of the program or what we actually manage through my office is we have to establish the program criteria, how to do that geographic exchange, identify what kind of tabulations the states are indicating that they need to be able to do their legislative redistricting. We have to conduct the program in a nonpartisan manner, which is why we get these official liaisons from each state. We do that at the beginning of the program by soliciting the legislative leadership of both parties and both chambers to identify someone who can represent the state in a nonpartisan manner. And we work with them throughout the course of the decade. And then we are required to deliver those tabulations to the governor and the officers or public bodies with the initial responsibility for legislative apportionment or districting no later than 1 year from Census Day. And I will talk about the schedule here in a minute because that is our goal there. So this is the 5th decade of the program. For most of these iterations, we designed a program that had several phases. We had a 5-phase program this time around. For the geographic part, we had the block boundary suggestion project, which is exactly what it sounds. We worked with the state to have suggestions for block boundaries. Specifically with Vermont, we worked with the state to rectify some issues in Washington County. I know that there's a long-standing issue there around the University of Vermont. And so we worked there to help craft the correct block structure that should exist for that area. And then we also referred the state to the secondary program of the local updated census addresses so that they could work with them to ensure that the addresses that are in that county are located in the correct location specifically for that, that problem area that's been an issue for the last 2 decades. So hopefully when the data comes out, that will be resolved. We also collected these voting districts. Voting districts is our generic term for precincts and wards at the Census Bureau. It's sort of a catch-all. We worked with the state to collect those. Phase 3, which is the data delivery, and I'm going to talk about that in a little more detail. Phase 4 is when we're going to reach back out after you've done all the hard work of creating the new districts, and we'll request that you submit copies of your boundary work to the Census Bureau so that we can include them in our geographic database and then continue to make useful statistics going forward through things like the American Community Survey. And then finally, we do an evaluation and recommendation, create a formal report. We look at how the program was conducted, what worked, what didn't work, what's changed in the legal landscape, and the guiding principles for the development of the next decennial's program. So we'll actually be starting that next year, right after we get the data out. So this is probably what most people are interested in. Typically our schedule for delivering the geographic materials and the tabulations would be well established and publicized by now. But unfortunately, with the COVID-19 delays and our work to publish the 2020 apportionment numbers as close to their statutory deadline as possible, we're having to rework the original redistricting schedule. You may have heard it mentioned publicly by the Census Bureau that in order to deliver the apportionment counts as soon as possible, we have decoupled some activities that would have happened together but were needed for redistricting and not apportionment. So it's going to take us a few more weeks to accommodate those changes and produce an updated schedule for the official redistricting release. We're working to provide the redistricting tabulations as close to the statutory deadline as possible, but while we're assuring the quality of that data. So we want to make sure that we're taking the amount of time that's necessary to make sure that that is a high quality data that people expect. It's also not yet completely official, but I do believe strongly that we will move to a single data delivery rather than our original plan, which was to release buckets of states each week over the course of several weeks. So it'll be a national delivery of all the redistricting data on the same day. As soon as we have those timelines and the final expectations sort of set, we will make sure that we inform the official liaisons to the program, other stakeholders, and of course the public as well.
James, at a high level, what is the difference between the prototype and the official data?
So that's actually an excellent question. So the prototype data is something that the Census Bureau creates as a demonstration product to demonstrate the content and schemas of the products that we intend to produce for the 2020 census. We make these off of our 2018 end-to-end test, census test this decade. In past censuses, it was off our dress rehearsals. And so the products themselves are only for the area in which we conducted that test. So this is for Providence, Rhode Island. We have the geographic products and we have the redistricting data. So although it's not for your specific area of interest or your state, it does have all the structure that you would need. So if you're looking at designing a system or being able to work with that data or knowing what levels of geography you're going to be provided in the shapefiles or other materials that you receive, you can work with those products to do that type of work and get yourself ready, so that then all you have to do is import the data once you receive it. So and there's a link that will take you directly to the web page that has that. This is one of the reasons why I wanted to use the slide deck, so that I could put a few things like this in here. There's a link that'll take you to those materials so you can see them for yourself if that's something that you're interested in, or if you're working with a vendor, you can point your vendor to them so they have access to that. But there is one piece of happy news that I have, and that's to tell you that we've finished redoing the schedule for the geographic support materials, and we'll start delivering them next month. We expect to start delivering them by January 22nd, and then have them to all states, the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico, no later than February 28th. It's very likely we'll be able to beat that end date, but because we have to go through our quality control process, we wanted to make sure that we're advertising a window that we felt confident that everything would be out the door and in the hands of the state, so they could begin working with their official data. In that official data, we have 4 primary geographic products. You'll have the shape files. Those are the geographic files that can work in a geographic information system to allow computerized mapping and analysis and manipulation. So we'll have those will be provided. We'll have maps, a series of maps, county block maps, which show the detail of every individual block within a county on one or more map sheets. State legislative with voting district maps, so you can see the relationship between the voting districts that we have at Census and the state legislative districts. Tract maps and school district maps. These are all in PDF format. They'll be posted online. They'll be delivered on hard copy to the official recipients on a DVD, and they're designed to be able to be printed out on plotters for those areas that you need. We also have block assignment files. These are tabular files that list all the blocks in the state and which geographies are associated with them. And each tabular file is for a different geographic type. So you have one for places, you have one for state legislative district, Senate districts, et cetera. And then finally, a block-to-block relationship file. This is a crosswalk of the 2010 to the 2020 blocks. If for some reason you have to do a longitudinal analysis across time between those two, this would give you the ability to identify how those blocks are related. A lot of people aren't aware that when the census creates census blocks each decade, we completely throw out the ones from the previous decade and regenerate them using our block algorithm that creates them. In an urban environment, they're going to look pretty much the same, but when you get out to other areas, they can be quite different. After the 2010 census, there was or because of the 2010 census, we had a huge proliferation of blocks nationwide. We went from just a little over 8 million up to over 11 million blocks in the nation. And after analyzing those, we found that they were, a lot of them were not of high quality. They were things like clover leaves at highways and things like that. So we did some work to restructure that algorithm, and we did get the number of blocks for the nation back down to around just over 8.1 million, I think. And this is just a list of all the different shapefiles that you'll get. I put this in here as a reference so you can see what we're providing. There's some duplication here between the state-based files and the county-based files. We didn't want to force local jurisdictions who also have their own redistricting work or other work that they have to do to work with only state-based files. So we provide several of these as both state-based or county-based files. They're the same data, same boundaries, but when you see a duplicate between the two lists, that's why they're there. And then the data itself. When we do finally get you the count data, if you've worked with the 2010 census data, this should look very familiar to you. The first 5 tables are exactly the same as what we provided for the 2010 census. So you have a race table, race for the voting age population, Hispanic or Latino and not Hispanic or Latino by race, and then for the same for the voting age population. And then finally a table with housing unit counts, and then a breakdown of those counts as to whether they were considered occupied or vacant by the census when we conducted the census. There are other states that have an obligation to reallocate people from what we call group quarters. Group quarters are things like correctional institutions for adults, military barracks, university housing. And so as part of our work to assist those states with their state statutory requirement to do that work, we've included this decade a new table, which is our group quarters population by group quarters type. This is only for total population. It doesn't have demographic breakouts, but it will identify the group quarters total population for each of these group quarters types you see listed under here. All of these tables are provided at the individual census block levels. You get the finest level of geographic granularity for any of the that census provides. And if you're not familiar with them, this is sort of how they're structured. For the race table, an individual can select one or more races. And so the way that's reported is each, if they selected one race, they would be reported by that race within the population of one race. If they selected 2, they would be reported by that combination. And that's iterated all the way down to where someone picked all 6 races as their race. And then for the voting age version of that table, all we do is we swap in the universe so that the table only reports those people who are 18 years or older. We do the same with the Hispanic or Latino versions. If someone says that their ethnicity is Hispanic or Latino, they get automatically grouped into the Hispanic or Latino group. And then those who said they were not Hispanic or Latino get iterated through those different race groupings as well. As I mentioned, the housing table is very simple, straightforward. It has total housing units, and then it has them broken down by whether they were occupied or vacant. And then the group quarters table, which does the total population in group quarters, and then breaks it out by these different group quarters types, which are what we call the major group quarters types. So how will this data actually get out to the states? We have a list of what we call official recipients. This would be the governors, the legislative leadership, and then any redistricting commissions if they exist and have a commissioner named. The method of delivery is we'll be sending by overnight mail a DVD and a flash drive. They'll both contain the same information, but we recognize that sort of DVDs are on their way out. So we wanted to have another option for people. So we'll send that by overnight mail. The next day when that is supposed to be arriving, if the official recipients have pre-registered, and we'll be working with them over the next few months to get that pre-registration done, they can log into our data.census.gov platform in an embargoed environment and access the data that way. So they'll have 2 choices on that will be happening on the same day. My office will be monitoring the web to see if people have gone into the embargoed access and tapped the data, or also tracking the mail packages to see if they've arrived. We'll be following that up with phone calls. We need to confirm that both parties in the state have received the data. And once we do that, the next day, we'll move into public release, where that embargoed environment will actually become public, and the full Data Explorer functionality on data.census.gov will be available. And we've actually increased its capacity over our old American Fact Finder tool that we had last decade, so that if a user wants to, they can select all blocks within a state for all the tables in the redistricting data set and pull them down all at once. That was a limitation that on our previous tool that we used to have, the American Fact Finder, where you could only do about a county at a time. So that we think is a good innovation there. We'll also publish our expert user formatted data files, which are text files that sort of act as flat files in a relational database that you can bring into a database and create a relationship and then do subqueries to pull data out. The important thing here is if you do plan to use these files, last decade we only had 2 data segments. This decade we have 3 because we have to accommodate that new table, that group quarters table. And we changed the way these are stored. Last decade, the geo header was a fixed width file and the data segments were comma delimited files. So to simplify things, we've just created them all as pipe delimited text files. So that should help people who are trying to do the imports for that data. And then finally, the last thing I wanted to talk about was the citizen voting age population by race and ethnicity tables. My office has been publishing a special tabulation from the American Community Survey 5-year estimates since 2011 that was requested by the Department of Justice Voting Rights Section to help them with their analysis of voting election plans under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. We've done that every year, and we will be publishing one again in February of this coming year based on that survey. The couple things to know specifically about that: the smallest level of geography that's published for is the block group. So it's not the block, it's the block group, which is a collection of blocks, so a slightly bigger area. And it is also published using the 2010 statistical geography. So the 2010 blocks, the 2010 block groups, the 2010 tracts. It's used because this is based off of the most recent American Community Survey 5-year estimates, which are the 2015 to 2019. So they haven't moved into the 2020 range, so they're not using the 2020 version of that geography. There is also another planned census voting age population special tabulation that will be created from the 2020 census. This is the one that you may have read about in the news. It's going to be calculated using administrative records and using the 2020 census as its base. The big difference here is we've added one race category, which is some other race alone. That's something that's in the decennial census, but is not in the American Community Survey. So to make it more compatible with the decennial census, we added that category. And we've also brought this down to block level geography. Since we're using the decennial census as the base, we can actually create block level geography for that. So that one, the timing on that is unknown at this time. It's in the way that the redistricting schedule is dependent on the apportionment schedule. The 2020 census CVAP special tabulation is dependent on the redistricting schedule. So until we get that finalized, we can't finalize the schedule for this product either. But it is something that is planned for next year. And with that, I would stop my remarks and I'm going to stop the share. But I'd be happy to take any questions. And also if I have to pass this back. Let's see.
Yes, please, James, if you could make me the host now. Thank you.
Let me see if I.
We'll click on participants and.
Okay. Chris.
One obvious question. Do we have a preliminary total for Vermont?
We do not. That work will come out when we do the apportionment counts. Will be the first time we see state population totals. And so we have to wait for them to finish that processing work before we'll have that amount, that number.
Okay.
I'd like to reassure the board members that there will not be a quiz on what James has talked to us about. That's a lot. That's an awful lot of information, but very helpful. And I think we can ponder it going forward. And if we need to reach out to you, we will.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Jeannie.
Thank you very much. That was, yeah, it was a lot, but I'm glad to have the PowerPoint slides that you sent, so I can try to look up things as I think of them. But my question is just regarding the last slide and the citizen voting age population. That you made a reference to something in the news, and are you speaking about the case that's at the Supreme Court right now?
No, that's a different issue around citizenship. That's involving citizenship and apportionment from a presidential memo. The CVAP based on the 2020 census is being conducted based on instructions from the Secretary of Commerce.
So as you said, I mean, it said on the slide, using administrative records only, yes?
Yes, that was, there was no citizenship question on the census, so
Correct.
that special tabulation would be using administrative records only.
Okay, just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Sure.
Anyone else have a question for James or a comment for that matter? I think while James was speaking with us, our board member Mary Houghton joined us, came in from the cold. So welcome, Mary.
Tom, if I may, James, quick question. Sometimes I see that there are census estimates. What is that?
So
I mean, I know what an estimate is.
Yeah, no, there's specific programs that the Census Bureau does. So like that demographic analysis that I mentioned that came out 2 days ago, that is based on estimates, which is where they modify and track population over time using birth and death records and immigration counts and things like that. And so the Census Bureau tends to publish an annual set of population estimates, which is a separate program conducted separately from the census. We work with a group, I forget what the acronym stands for. It's our FSCPE folks in each state to help gather that information. And so that's sort of an independent estimate of the population number. So there is actually something coming out later this month, I believe on the 22nd, which will be a population estimates that will have population estimates for the states. So that might give you an indication of the total population for Vermont at that point.
Is there any kind of data on the standard deviation of those from what the ultimate census numbers are over time?
The demographic analysis group will probably publish some comparisons because that's part of what they do is compare to the population estimates to the demographic analysis, but I can't say specifically what's in those files. I'm not that familiar with them.
You know, do other states use that to get preliminary census block numbers and try and start their process? Do you know?
No, because it's not reported at that level of granularity.
Oh, I see.
I think the ones that are coming out at the end of this month on the 22nd are states and possibly county. I think it's just state. I think it's just state totals. It's the kind of thing though that if you see people predicting apportionment, I know apportionment doesn't really affect Vermont, but if you see people doing those predictions of apportionment across the country, who's going to lose a seat and stuff, and they do it all decade long, they usually base it off of those estimates each year. But it's only for large geography.
Ed, I think we can follow up on that line of questioning with John Adams from the Vermont Center for Geographic Information, because we had part of that conversation in September with him, and we can continue that.
I have another question. Is that all right?
Yes, certainly.
2 questions actually, but I think they're short. I just wanted to, I'm looking at page 9 from the presentation. I got it open over here on my computer, and this is the one where you've displayed the original planned dates for the geographic products and for the redistricting data. And I just wanted to confirm that you do have kind of a new estimate of, between January and the end of February for the geographic products, but
Yes.
you're not sure about the original date for redistricting data would have been mid-February to end of March. Do you know when you'll know what the new dates are?
I can give you sort of a guess. So where we are in the process of developing that new schedule of, as I mentioned, we had to create processes that didn't exist in the plan because we changed what we were doing for apportionment, where some activities would have been done that were then delayed. So we had to reincorporate those activities, get them back into the plan. We actually have what we feel at my level. I work very closely with our data products and dissemination team, and the lead over there and I have been working on a redistricting schedule. We have something we feel strongly is a good schedule. We're going to start briefing that to census executives on Tuesday, the 29th. But then, of course, as you know, working with government, it has several layers it will have to go to. So it'll be that first group of executives, then it'll be the chief of the decennial program, then the deputy director of the Census Bureau, the director of the Census Bureau, and then possibly the Secretary of Commerce. So the plan is available, but we won't be able to say anything publicly till we run that gauntlet, which will probably take several weeks.
Okay, I think I get what you're saying. And then my second question is slightly more technical, and I'm not sure hopefully I'll phrase it in a way that makes sense. I'm just going back to some of you provided some information about quality measures and how you look at that, and just curious whether there are any issues that might be different for a small population state, right, where you're dealing with such small numbers that make some of those analyses kind of challenging in a different way, potentially. That's all. I'm not sure. I won't say any more than that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does. It's not an area I'm as versed in as I can say as the redistricting information in particular. It does make sense that areas with smaller populations may be paying attention to different things than what someone would say in Los Angeles County with 5 million people or whatever they have in that county alone. But some of the other things is there are standard geographic pieces that you could look at. So like a census tract has an ideal population. So when census tracts get defined across the nation, no matter how populous an area is, we shoot for an ideal population. I don't quote me on this, but I think it's about 1,400 people. But then there's some give, it can be in a range around that. So there might be pieces of geography that even for a state with a smaller population would be valuable to look at if you see numbers reported at that granularity.
Yeah. Well, I'll keep an eye on it. This was something that I was thinking about because of some of the other preliminary data that we are looking at, and the challenge in some ways of dealing with very small numbers. Anyway, that's okay. Thank you.
Good question, Jeannie. Thank you. Anyone else on the board like to lob a question into James? If not, James, thank you so much. We'll let you know how we do. And if you have updates that you feel you are in a position to share when you are in that position, please, you know how to find us, send them along.
Certainly, please. And my email address is in the PowerPoint presentation on that last slide. So if people have follow-up questions, I'm more than happy to either give you the answer or find you someone who can. So please don't be shy.
Good. Be well. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. And I'd like to thank again Mike Chernick and Betsy and Rast for suggesting James as a resource. That this is in some respects a little overwhelming, but I'm useful information. Continuing on the agenda, I had thrown in website content. I think the website content is continuing to grow, but if board members identify or locate additional materials send them along to me, and with the Secretary of State's office assistance, we will get them uploaded.
And Tom, if I could just note quickly, you mentioned the 2 previous board meetings. Those recordings are out there on the website, just so everybody, under the
Good.
resources page.
Are they making it into the top 10 most watched?
Thousands and thousands of views, yes.
Yeah. Okay, good. I think each member of
TikTok, I
the,
think.
each member of the apportionment board, I believe, participated in a Maptitude training session since our last board meeting. And that was also a bit overwhelming, at least for a few of us, but well worth it, at least for no other reason than to impress upon us what Maptitude looks at and what the sort of the options are within it. I wasn't able to stay till the very end, but I did was there to start playing around with mapping, and for the benefit of those not involved in that training, what the trainer, the person who led the training, started with was starting to build a Senate map from scratch, not modifying the existing Senate districts, but to start from scratch, mainly to demonstrate how Maptitude works and can work. And that was useful to see what happens when you start to build. In this case, I believe it was a single member district starting at the northwest corner of the state. I know that, and that I should add, that exercise used the 2010 census data, which is the data that is now loaded into the Maptitude system. And I have heard nothing more, board members, from our inquiries about the possibility of having the census estimated data that the Vermont Center for Geographic Information has developed into Maptitude, so we could be using Maptitude with more current data. I'm starting to get the sense that that's not possible.
Tom,
Yes.
are we stuck with Maptitude?
Well, it is it depends on what we mean by stuck. It is the system that Legislative Council has acquired a license to for use by the Apportionment Board and the Secretary of State's office and the General Assembly. So they have made that decision. There's nothing, I don't believe there's anything that is prohibiting the Apportionment Board or board members from using other options.
Mm-hmm.
I think ultimately, because we know what the legislature is going to be using, we're going to want to deliver with our final reports to the House and the Senate something that is at the very least is using Maptitude.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't get any responses, but I sent out a free web-based mapping software that's compatible with both Macs and PCs that took me about 15 minutes to figure out. It's not quite as granular as Maptitude, but I wonder if something else exists out there that is. I have to say, and I consider myself relatively tech savvy. I certainly don't teach it at Norwich, but you know, I think that fundamentally having a obtuse software like Maptitude puts members of this committee at a disadvantage because it doesn't allow people to fully integrate into a system that should be fully integratable. And by that, I mean, the system that I sent out essentially allows you to point and click on a district. Maptitude is almost like programming, which is why the one programmer among us seems to be the most comfortable with it, in my humble opinion. And, you know, I can only speak from my own experience, but it's not organic and it's not really a good system. And I would love to hear other people's plain thoughts on that, because I don't think we should be replicating a system that's poorly designed and looks like I said before, placed on top of a DOS system in order to patch it into a Windows system.
Well, Ed, when I got your email, I went on that website and I got on and I got as far as bringing up a map of the current district, and then I couldn't do anything with it. So
that was the hardest part, Tom, but if you could get past that, it gets a lot easier after that.
well, maybe.
But good for trying.
A phone call and you can give me a little guidance on it, and I'd like to try it.
Great.
Oh, hi. Thanks for sending that. I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to look at it. And can you remind me just the name of it? This other. You're muted.
I'll send it again. It's Dave's Redistricting.org. It's just some guy that put it together, you know, and it's like better than what the state spend a lot of money on.
Well, the reason I was asking, because I've seen others too. I can't remember. That's why I couldn't remember the name of the one I've also seen, but it's different than that one. But I also just wanted to say that and I agree that it's certainly Maptitude is, because it can do so much, it requires a lot of upfront orientation, you might say, to say it in a nice way. But I found that you could do pointing and clicking actually on districts. So I don't know. I feel like maybe there's more that, and I'm sure there's tons more that I don't know about it. I don't want to pretend that the one training got me farther than it did. But I do think by the end, I felt like I could quite easily say, okay, add this town to my district or take it out, or, you know, it wasn't that difficult in the end. So I guess I would say I haven't given up yet.
I don't think the towns are the problem, though. I think the problem will arise when you need to parse individual pieces of a town to make either a Senate district or legislative district. I hear what you're saying. I don't think that here's just my general thought. I think to have to spend a day even, which is what we spend on learning how to use software, isn't a good use of my time. And I don't know about other folks, but in the world that we live in, where things are easily point and clickable, even at a granular level, I have to think there's a better solution out there.
Well, the other thing to keep in mind is all of the data, and I definitely hear what you're saying. I mean, I don't want to use a system that's more difficult than it needs to be, for sure. That's crazy. But at some point, all the new census numbers are going to have to be uploaded into the system that we're using, so that we can actually be working with precise and up-to-date data. And that, I assume, will be done in Maptitude because that's what we've contracted for.
I think you're
Whereas it won't be for any other system that we might want to be playing around with. Is that correct, Tom?
Well, I don't know what, I imagine that the system that Ed has been using and is describing will somehow capture the final census data that James was explaining to us this morning in some manner.
That's the part I'm not so clear about, because we don't know who Dave is, you know.
I think Dave's
that's
not
totally
here.
true. I was just using it as an example. That's all.
Yeah. I think that I go back to my earlier comment. I think at the end of the day, regardless of what else we have been using that we find more agile and user-friendly, we're going to want to produce proposed Senate and House district maps in Maptitude. And I know that we'll be getting assistance in doing that when we need it. And I'm confident that we will be able to produce those maps, which is a good, I think a good segue to the next question, which on the agenda, which essentially is what, in light of what we've learned from James and when we're likely to get those final census data and load it into Maptitude or any other mapping system, which my guess is, I think he essentially said that we'll have a new estimate about that by third or fourth week in January, which will tell us whether that date is the end of March or sometime in April or even May. And they have a tough balancing act to do between getting things out in a timely manner and getting them out with a high level of confidence about their integrity and accuracy. But it strikes me that whether we're using Maptitude with old data or the VCGI data and without mapping software per se, that we should be using the VCGI estimated data to identify the districts, House and Senate, with significant population deviations, negative and positive, and developing some sensible approach to how we want to address those deviations. And I'll combine the agenda item 6 discussion with that. There are at a high level, there's two ways to approach this work. One is an incremental approach, looking at the existing districts and seeing how deviation problems can be resolved, making as few changes to the existing districts as appears reasonably possible. And the other approach is to say, we're going to start more or less by scratch, from scratch, and start building districts with low positive and negative deviations, and build a map that way. And my own view is that we should, for the benefit of the work that we pass on to the legislature, is that we should be doing some version of both of those. I think we know intuitively that the House and Senate are going to be interested in work that is incremental, but I think also will be interested, particularly if the incremental approach just somehow seems unsatisfying or just doesn't feel like it's addressing deviation problems as well as it might, to see what a more of a from scratch approach might do in terms of achieving substantial equality of voting rights across the state. But I think we have the tools now, even if without perfected mapping software with new data, I think we have the tools now to make some real progress on identifying high deviation districts and potential solutions to them, either incrementally or from scratch. And that's what I think we should start doing. I had individual phone calls with each member of the board, and ran that idea by each of you and gave you my a sort of brainstorming example of how you might do an incremental approach to the existing Senate districts. And there's a way to do that that I think gets the overall deviation within at least constitutional limits, if not ideal limits, or even very good limits. But at the end of that exercise, as I think I told you, I didn't have a overwhelming sense of accomplishment, because it still leaves unresolved, largely the apparent imbalance across the state between substantial negative deviation areas and substantial high deviation areas, and substantial voting equality for Senate districts. And that, if you look at the, as I have at the using the VCGI estimates and looking at the Senate deviations from the existing districts, you get the Bennington district's got a minus 10.17, and the Chittenden is a plus 14.75, Franklin's plus 14.3, and Lamoille's plus 13.19. That is a considerable population bulge, which has been there and has been growing for 10 or 20 years. It just now seems to be close to or at some kind of a tipping point. And I note that based upon the VCGI statistics, the estimated population, the existing Chittenden district is just about 2,400 people shy of the ideal size for a 7-member district, which isn't something I'm proposing. I mention it to illustrate what appears to have been happening continuously over the last decades with the population of that area of the state. And when you look next door to Franklin and to Lamoille, you can see that there's a combined positive deviation of 28 or 29,000 people, which is exceeds the size of a typical Senate district. So let me open that up to comments and questions from board members in terms of where do you think, what can we start working on now pending receipt of the final census data, and how should we do it?
Well, I'll make a comment, Tom.
Please do.
One of the things we mentioned is last time we put together our maps, and then we took them sort of on the roadshow and got input from the communities. And given the delay in getting our census numbers, I thought it might make sense to flip that a little bit and start seeking public input first, making people aware of some of the issues that we're dealing with, the population bulges in Lamoille County, Franklin County, Chittenden County, and the loss of population in the southern part of the state, and see if maybe we can get some feedback about how local communities would have us deal with these things. And that could be the group putting together, writing an op-ed for local papers and soliciting comments via our website. It could maybe mean doing some sort of public outreach Zoom community meeting. But the general idea is getting public input first before we start putting together the map stuff. Because I think that makes more sense. I remember doing that 10 years ago. Hey, here's our map. This is what we think. And the tomatoes started flying pretty fast. So from a PR standpoint, it might make more sense to say, hey, this is the problem we're dealing with. What's your input? And then we'll go back and try and fix it the best we can to your specifications.
Rob, I think I agree, but I'd add, I think it would be incumbent upon us to use those opportunities as a way to initially educate about what the law requires, what we're finding so far with the population statistics, and saying, this is the problem that we as a state have to solve. What do you think about how we should solve it?
Yes, and that's what my thought about an op-ed from the group, either signed by you, Tom, or signed by all of us or something like that, that would state exactly that. This is the legal requirement that we have to do. We're at this 10-year period. These are the problems we're facing. Population increases in the northern part of the state and decreases in the southern and the northeastern part of the state. Our task over the next 6 months is X, Y, and Z, and we would like your input, and here's how you do it. That's how I would create a communication piece.
Thoughts? Anyone else? Mary, let's hear from you, Mary. What's your thinking about what we've raised here? I'm not connecting with Mary. Anyone else on the board? Good idea, bad idea? How should we get started? Well, I think we're already started. What are our next moves?
I have some thoughts about that idea, and I think I like it in general. And not having been here 10 years ago, I don't want to imply, I have any secret knowledge about it, and I can see sometimes when you present something, but it appears to be more completed than people even realized was happening, then they get annoyed if they didn't feel like they had input on the front end. So it's nice, but on the other hand, the only thing I would keep in mind is to try to characterize what the issues are as carefully as possible, so that people don't come away with an impression that might be more alarming than it needs to be, let's say, or something like that, or feel, in other words, not that obviously we would try to do that, but that would be the only concern, is that I might have, that people might, without understanding what's happening, they might think, for example, that because there's lower population in certain areas, that automatically means they're going to lose a representative or something like that. We wouldn't want to leave people with an impression when we don't have enough data to really even answer those questions yet.
Okay.
That would, things like that, just to keep in mind that that while we can see certain trends, that does not necessarily imply any particular actions that would need to be taken.
Right. I think there's a lot of interest based upon the election cycle that we're in, or we just finished, about access to the polls, to the ballot, voting rights, and that whole bundle of issues. And I think that this is either the next piece of that, or an integral part of it is that voting rights and the number of people in each legislative district and how that stacks up across the state is, I think, part of that same conversation. But we need to have it as an informed, intelligent, and candid but respectful conversation, which I think we can do here in Vermont.
Yeah, I would just add to that something, Tom, I think you've mentioned also, which is kind of folding it into a conversation about sort of almost like a civic conversation about public education on this topic.
Yep.
Tom, I think you're
Can't
muted.
hear you, Tom.
Darn. I think we've talked earlier in our meetings about trying to leverage relationships with the K through 12 education community in Vermont as a possible way of doing that. I know that when back in when dinosaurs roamed the earth, when I was in elementary school, the first reapportionment happening in 1965 was used in the elementary and then junior high schools or middle schools as a civics example of how government works in Vermont and how the Constitution applies to it. Would you like to consider, so I will ask, I will reach out to you all after this meeting and try to find a way to pull together a way of drafting some educational and outreach materials, including an op-ed piece. And I think we should jump on that. And thanks for that suggestion, Rob. And I also would like I'm going to suggest now and then in follow up that we consider maybe breaking down into some subgroups, maybe 2 or 3 people working on a House map and 2 or 3 people working on a Senate map, just to see where it takes us. I think the brainstorming and experimentation that you can do in that setting could be very helpful. Can I get some reaction to my comments about developing both an incremental approach to redistricting and a from scratch approach? Is that a good use of our time? Is that what you think is expected of us? What are your thoughts? Any?
Yeah, I think I agree with you, Tom. I think we should be looking at both. I think that's just a matter of due diligence. I agree that the legislature is likely to be looking at minimal changes that they can get away with. But I think we haven't done our job unless we really look at rebuilding the whole system.
Concur.
Ed or Jeannie, do you want to weigh in? Jeannie,
Sure.
you are, there you go.
Sure. I don't, the main thought I have, I'm not opposed to it necessarily. I think it makes sense to be thinking at it from both perspectives, really. The one thing that it does, that I was thinking, I'm not sure if it is directly connected to this, you know, looking at these two methods, but I think because of the nature of the statutory requirements around what has to happen to the Chittenden Senate District, you know, I mean, I realize that doesn't necessarily ripple out to the whole state, but it's so fundamental. It's like it has to happen. It's not like a, you know, option. That certain, so that's an example where no matter what, certain things we should be starting with,
Right.
You know, as a baseline, regardless of whether we think of it as an incremental or from scratch, if you know what I'm saying. So there's certain things where I think we can't avoid starting, or else we're going to box ourselves in and not, you know, run into problems later. That's all. So. Yeah. So that's my main thing. I don't know if on the House side that is, you know, the same kind of thing is at play, but that's kind of what was on my mind about that.
Okay. Well, and with the from scratch, I use that phrase a lot. We need to keep in mind that our state constitution is directing us to it says we shall seek to adhere to boundaries of counties and other existing political subdivisions in the Senate plan. And likewise, the Constitution says pretty much the same thing about House districts, so that a from scratch approach needs to be faithful to that to some extent, or at least very candid about what it's doing, as it would seem to be inevitably move further away from a Senate map that bears some close resemblance to counties, but less so than it did 40 years ago. I was talking with, I think, I forget who it was. It might have been with you, Rob, but I think I've mentioned it to others that in Vermont, where the county government and the function of a county is so attenuated, we elect sheriffs and probate judges and state's attorneys and high bailiffs and side judges on a county basis. And every county has a county budget, although almost nobody knows that or knows what it is. Notwithstanding that, many of us across the state have a strong identification with or feeling for their county. So if he says, I'm from Windsor County, you sort of know what that means, and you feel some sort of ownership of that, and it has some meaning. So when we're talking about changing Senate districts to look less like counties and moving towns here and there, people will often have strong feelings about that. And it's not because their county is functioning as a government for them that they feel a strong tie to. It's just the way it's grown up. And as Rob, as I think you mentioned, it may be we like the counties because they don't tell us what to do as a governmental unit. So there's not a lot to dislike about them. It's just and in that regard, I'm going to be posting for you all two bits of history. I may have done the first one in 1980. After the 1982 redistricting, the state Vermont publishes every 2 years the state legislative directory and state manual, which includes all sorts of interesting information about state government and who's elected and who's appointed by governors, both in terms of in the administration and in boards and commissions. And at the beginning, there's always, at the year after there's a reapportionment, there's a piece on reapportionment. You can go back to those years, including 1983, and find some interesting information. And Professor Frank Bryan, who I'm sure you know of or know, with respect to the 1982 reapportionment, wrote a very interesting historical synopsis of it, how it emerged in the 1960s, but how it has roots in the 19th century. Very interesting. And then with the 1992 redistricting, there was a piece written, I think, for the Secretary of State's office by then Deputy Secretary of State Paul Gillies about reapportionment, and it goes into this issue of counties in some depth, and I'll send that along for your information and to read when you get a spare time.
Tom,
Yes.
just if you don't mind me jumping in for a second.
Not at all.
You had asked about incremental versus from scratch. I want to get to that in a minute, but I can't help but notice that in addition to the Deputy Secretary of State, there's 2 senior members of the governor's staff. I'm wondering if they wanted to jump in and say anything, or if they're just watching. They probably have other stuff to do. A, and B, I think the incremental versus from scratch is going to depend on what we're doing, because most of the state, right, is going to not change. So if it's not changing, it's easy to do incrementally. If it's going to change significantly, then we need to probably think about it from scratch. So.
Yeah. I think that'll be somewhat of an iterative undertaking. And with respect to our guests and visitors in the meeting, I'm be happy to reopen the public comment segment of the meeting before we adjourn, and let them or anyone else who's not on the board add a comment to the meeting.
I will. So this is Jay Pershing Johnson. I'm the governor's legal counsel. I appreciate the invitation from Mr. Adrian. I mean, I would just like to say we're listening, and we're interested, obviously, but we're listening. I really appreciate Tom's adherence to the constitutional requirements, which obviously is important to me. And I really appreciate, and I know we all really appreciate the work that you all have stepped up to do, because it's complex and difficult to understand. And I appreciate the tech experts who have, thought so carefully about the tools at your disposal. And anyway, like I said, we're just listening, and I appreciate the attention to detail and the seriousness that you've, undertaken this with. And like the rest of the world, I think we're interested in how this comes out. So thank you.
Good to hear from you, Jay. Thanks. And anyone else feel free to pipe up now, or not. It's perfectly okay to just stand by off stage and watch and listen. That's perfectly okay too.
I'll just add to the question about adding more recent estimates to the Maptitude software. I did receive that request from Duncan Goss, and provided the Census Block Group latest estimates that we had. And I think Maptitude wanted those numbers at the census block level, which is an even finer geography for which we do not have estimates. So I cannot provide them with census block estimates that we don't have to enter into that, enter into Maptitude. And it sounds like they cannot take the block group numbers.
They cannot?
They cannot use the block group numbers. They need it at the block level. We could try to distribute those block group numbers down to the block, but I would be very hesitant to do that, given that we're already operating within a relatively wide margin of error, and that would just increase that margin of error further. So I don't know that it would be responsible to try to do that.
Okay, thanks for that update, John.
The other thing is, I think they also have released now last week or a few days ago the 2019 5-year estimates, and we were working with the 2018. So if I get a chance, I'll try to update the numbers we have. I don't imagine they'll change very much, but
okay, that would be appreciated. The closer we get to final numbers, the better off we are. So I'm just I'm gonna check off a few more. I thought it would make sense to throw out suggestions for the for meeting dates in January and February. And I don't recall whether I had done, I had previously suggested a January meeting, but the dates to sort of keep on the same cycle of the month. I'm looking at January 14 and February 18, 9 to 11 in the morning for the sake of opening up the discussion. So if you can tell me now that that's good or not good, shout out if you need to go check a calendar and get back to me, that's fine. And we'll find a date that works for us.
Either one of those is fine by me, Tom.
Okay.
Yep, they look good for me too.
Sorry, Tom, could you just repeat those again?
January 14 and February 18.
They seem good for me.
Me as well.
Okay. And I'm going to think about whether it makes sense for one or those meetings to invite James Whitehorn back for an update on the update that we asked him for today that he said he couldn't really provide yet. Mary, is that you?
She said in the chat that both dates worked for her.
Okay, all right. I'm not, she must be having some trouble with the audio, because on the participant list, Mary, you're showing up as participating with your microphone not muted. But it doesn't always mean it's working for you. Let's see what you're saying in the. Okay, apparently your mic is, okay. Well, we're glad that you've been with us, Mary. We'd love to talk to you. We'll figure it out for the next meeting. Is there any other matters that the committee, or the board rather, would like to bring up today before we adjourn?
Yes.
Go ahead, Tom.
We've all been assigned a state email address. It's been years since I set up a new email account. How the heck do I get into this thing?
Okay. Well, I encountered the same challenge, Tom, and I worked with someone that Chris Winters from the Secretary of State's office made available to me, and Conda White was her name, I believe, and she was terrific. And I'm sure if you reach out to Chris, he will find someone who can help you work through that.
Okay, good. Thank you.
What I have found is that, and Jeannie Albert mentioned this before everybody got on into the meeting. I am not getting an automatic notification every time I get an email to that state email address. So I've been trying to discipline myself to check it a few times during the day. Jean said that she has put it on automatic forward to her regular email address as a way to make sure she doesn't miss anything there. But the
Can this wait?
all of the I know that the Secretary of State's office and others in state government And the public who is seeing our email addresses on the website as the vermontpartners.gov website are relying on being able to communicate with us using that address, and that makes it's more clearly in the public domain, et cetera. So please do whatever you can to be using that address. And if you need help, Chris can find someone to help you with it.
That's right.
If we put it on automatic forward to our, in my case, my Gmail account, does that expose my whole Gmail account to public scrutiny?
No. If you use your personal email account to do the board's business, we would ask you to search your Gmail account should we get any sort of public records request. So it's better practice to use that partner account. That way, if we get a public record request, we can do the records gathering for you and keep it all on that account. And Conda White is available to assist any of you if you're having trouble with your partner account. She'd be happy to do that.
Just here's a tip too, Tom. For me anyway, I have 5 different emails and I have an iPhone. I'm assuming everybody has a smartphone. It's way easier to check that stuff on your phone than to try and log on to a whole bunch of different sites. At least it is for me. And you can also set it up so you get notifications, at least on an iPhone. I'm assuming it's the same thing with an Android platform. So that might be something you want to look into too if you use your phone for email.
Okay. And thank you, Ed. And I think, let me just see who's, Mr. Chernick, I know you're in the meeting on mute. Is there anything that you would like to brief us on or share with us that's appropriate from the perspective of Legislative Council as we move towards a new session of the legislature?
No, just right now, continuing to monitor and being aware, Betsy and I being aware of what's going on.
Okay. Well,
Thank you very much.
it gives us some comfort knowing that you're keeping track of us. Okay. Anything else for the good of the effort? It wouldn't break anyone's heart if we adjourned a little bit before our end of the hour. Okay, thank you for your attendance and your diligence. I'll be in touch to follow up on some of the items we covered at this meeting, and enjoy a safe end to the calendar year. Be well.
Thanks, Tom. Happy holidays, everybody.
Thank you.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.